The NBA draft is a week away, so we're answering your questions about Miami's next potential star. Will the Heat try to move up in the draft? Are they targeting a specific position? What name is generating the latest buzz? We answer that and much more in today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil, both of us credentialed Heat media members. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're continuing our Blue Notebook NBA Draft Prep Series. One episode each week at least between now and the draft. The draft next week, we'll be diving into the scouting reports on a bunch of prospects that we're going to organize by major questions and themes. And today, we're going to get to a bunch of your draft-related mailbag questions later on in the show. But first, David, I wanted to ask you about a few of the prospects that we haven't gotten to so far. Kind of the loosies, in other words. We're going to do that. But first, the jingle.
That's what I'm doing. I'm taking 10 blue notebooks with me to Malibu with my wife. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. 10 blue notebooks to Malibu. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. 10 blue notebooks to Malibu.
My life.
So, David, before we get to some of the mailbag questions that people sent in about trading up in the draft and some other potential targets, we got a question about Bronny James. I do want to ask you about a few prospects that have moved up and down the board and maybe are more in the range for the Miami Heat than we would have thought a few weeks ago that we haven't gotten a chance to get to. So I'm going to give you three names. You just tell me which one is most interesting to you and that you want to talk about a little bit. We've got Kentucky's Rob Dillingham, who was always considered a top 10 pick, but because of various team needs and some questions, there's a chance that he could fall in the draft. Marquette's point guard, Tyler Kolek, who is moving up draft boards. It feels like Phoenix at number 22 might be his floor at this point, but the Ringer mocked Kolek as high as 15th of the Heat this week, so I want to ask you about him. And then Cal's Jaylen Tyson, who is getting compared to by draft scouts to Caleb Martin, and so there's an obvious fit there with Miami. So of those three, Dillingham, Kolek, Tyson, which one do you want to talk about first?
I think Dillingham is the obvious choice there because I think he's the more talented player in terms of where he was projected to go in the draft. I think some had him even close to a top 5 selection. So Miami's had some history with that during Pat Riley's tenure, Caron Butler in 2002, Justice Winslow a decade later. So they know what it's like to see a player kind of slip potentially in the draft and then be available to them at a mid-first round selection. So I think Dillingham makes a lot of sense. He's a point guard with scoring ability. He can shoot the ball. He can attack the rim. I think the questions about him are mostly size related. He's a little undersized, but not drastically so. I just wonder whether or not Miami sees him as their potential guard in the future.
He's a little bit smaller, but the thing about him that sticks out to me watching the film, he might have best handle in the draft. I mean, the thing's on a string. It's a little. I was going to say it's a little Kyrie Irving-esque, but that's hyperbole,
that's
probably. But it does
yeah.
feel like that. He's not at that level, but he would, if drafted by the Heat, immediately be the best ball handler, the best dribbler on the roster as a rookie. He would. Fair. And so, his shot goes in at a high rate. It's a little wonky. He kind of shoots it from his chest and a little bit on the way down. So I'm like, but it goes in, man. So I learned with Tyrese Halliburton, if it goes in, don't question it, right? Especially when you have the separation ability that somebody like Dillingham has. If he didn't have that separation ability, I'd be a lot more concerned about the wonky shot. But if he's getting open looks because of his handle, because of his speed, he's got great straight line speed as well. then I think it's a little bit better. Can play on the ball, can play off the ball, but there's an obvious sort of fit for him at the NBA level in terms of like a Malik Monk style point guard who is a microwave scorer, can shoot it from all three levels, and can develop into a strong pick and roll player. And
see, I see him, and I see Monk's teammate De'Aaron Fox. You know what I'm saying? A guy who's a little
Totally
undersized,
fair.
really explosive, really quick, and it's taken him a number of years to kind of get that shot to the point where it's really consistent at the NBA level. So I wonder if that's in Dillingham's future as well. But as far as, Miami and Miami fans have always had this kind of appreciation of Fox, a guy who played with Bam Adebayo, and it's like, well, maybe he's a target for the Heat at some point down the road. Well, guess what? You might have one fall in your lap on draft day, and if that's the case, maybe it's worth exploring. You and I talked about this yesterday, but there's also the idea that Miami passed up on Tyrese Maxey a couple of years ago, another Kentucky guard. He wound up landing in Philadelphia as a result, and then now they have the same opportunity to get a guy that's maybe got that same kind of offensive explosive potential.
Right.
Philadelphia picking just behind Miami in the first round. Yes, you wonder whether or not history will repeat itself. I don't know.
I would say if the top reason you're taking Dillingham, if he falls to you at 15, is FOMO over the next Tyrese Maxey,
you're not doing your job.
It's not a great reason. But I understand Heat fans being like, we can't let this happen again. But I do like him, man. He shot 44% from 3-point range last year. The assist to turnover ratio isn't great. He wasn't also asked to be their primary point guard. He was mostly a scorer. It'll take some years in the NBA to get to the level where he needs to be, but I do think he could walk in right away and be a bench scorer for a team, which is why he's been mocked up high to like, and a team like Memphis at 9, I've seen him land there. He's like, okay, that could be, when Ja Morant is out, he could sort of just be your sixth man. That to me makes a little bit of sense. And there's other teams too that do make sense for him. But the reason why he's falling is because there's not a perfect fit for him. Maybe in the top 15, you look at teams like Charlotte, Portland, that's a little too high. There might be more defensive, bigger guards on the board when those teams are picking. Utah doesn't really need that player anymore. They got Keontae George, who's a very similar kind of prospect to Rob Dillingham last year, and they like him. Chicago, maybe, but they have a smaller guard in Kobe White, who they really like. I don't know that Dillingham makes a ton of sense there. Oklahoma City, not a ton of sense. Sacramento, I can see actually making some sense, especially if they lose Malik Monk this offseason, going and getting the next Malik Monk potentially and pairing him with another guy. Like, it's sort of the same thing. So maybe that's but they're trying to trade out of that pick, and they kind of want more immediate help. So maybe that's not necessarily what they want to do. Portland, again, right ahead of Miami with the 14th pick, does not make sense for them. So that's why you have Miami at 15 as a potential landing spot for Dillingham. But let's move on to Tyler Kolek. Very different point guard out of Marquette, 23, almost 24 years old. And a good scorer, not the scorer that Dillingham is, also undersized, but just kind of a point guard's point guard, right? Like a traditional point guard in the sense that he's going to get the ball where it needs to go, can hit open shots, and teams are falling in love with his competitiveness and the fact that he was productive in college and feels more NBA ready than a lot of the other point guards in his class. What do you think about Kolek? Because even the Ringer had him going as high as 15 to Miami.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see him rise there. I think he's, everybody likes the idea of these type of guards, solid floor general, limited physically. Perhaps he's not explosive. He's not like the best pure athlete. So I don't know that Miami's necessarily looking to target somebody like that, especially at 15 when they need so much more athleticism. But his IQ, the fact that he's a 4-year player, it's a solid idea. I kind of want them to swing, and even if it's a swing and a miss, I'd rather that they swing for something big, like take on a challenge rather than the more surefire guy who could probably carve out 10 to 12 minutes a game, but probably doesn't have a high ceiling. I just don't see that Kolek has a high ceiling.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Left-handed TJ McConnell kind of comes up as a comparison for him. The shooting numbers are good, 39% on decent volume from 3-point range. The assist numbers are good. He's a better rebounder than his size would suggest. He's a crafty finisher. He has comparisons to Goran Dragic, Jalen Brunson. This is according to the Ringer. He's got good basketball feel. He's a good player. And I do understand if you're in the market for a backup point guard, and I do want to touch on that specific subject later on. But this point guard free agency class is not good. And maybe it does make sense for a team to look at the draft as a way to get your backup point guard. But as NBA ready as Kolek might be, he's still going to be a rookie. And playing point guard at an NBA level for a playoff team like the Heat is really hard. I don't care if you're a 23-year-old rookie, a 20-year-old rookie, or a 30-year-old rookie. It's hard if you've never played in the NBA before. So I don't love the pick at 15 for them. I don't, and I'm with you. It's as 15 that high in the draft. Even in this draft, I'd rather swing for some upside. But I like him as a player. Last one is Jaylen Tyson, Cal wing, but was used on the ball quite a bit last year. 6'5" with like a 6'8" wingspan. Really productive at Cal after a few years at other places. He transfers to Cal, scores almost 20 points per game. Decent three-point shot, competitive on both ends of the ball. A lot of comparisons because of his frame and overall playing style to Caleb Martin. So I get it as a Heat fit. We've been asked about him in our comments and on Twitter. But what are your thoughts on Jaylen Tyson?
I'll be honest with you. I didn't think he was a real potential option for Miami at 15. He was a guy who was slated to be a second-round pick and even a mid to late second-round pick. So the fact that he's climbing this highly has kind of been really unexpected for me. I don't know much about his game, but I think you and I talked about this, and this is a point that you made, that if you already got a Caleb Martin and you're looking for – well, I know that Caleb is likely to depart, but you're looking for more talent. You can always find another guy who you can develop as just a typical wing body, and all you have to do is kind of chisel him into a moldable NBA player. Like, why would you spend a draft pick on a guy who's got such a limited ceiling as Caleb Martin?
Right, you got Caleb Martin for nothing. You got him off the scrap heap as a free agent.
Thank you, J. Cole.
I would be looking, Jesus. I would be looking for, at 15, a better wing. I would be looking for a higher ceiling player. I like Jaylen Tyson just fine. 15 is way too high to take him, in my opinion. I think 43, he'll probably be off the board. If Miami is in a trade back situation, maybe that becomes more of a factor, but I still think that he's more theoretical than proven. Tyson is in terms of, well, he could be the next Caleb Martin. Well, he didn't really play like Caleb Martin at Cal. He's going to have to go from a high usage role to a very low usage role wherever he ends up, whether it's Miami or anywhere else in the NBA. He's not going to have the ball in his hands like he did all the time for a very thin Cal team. He's going to be on a much better, more talented team in the NBA. So I do have questions whether or not he could scale down. I think people think that it's really easy. It's not. It's playing a different sport when you have the ball in your hands all the time, to trying to figure out how to impact the game when you don't have the ball in your hands, hardly ever. Yeah. It's a really difficult thing to do. It's not just like, oh, well, the usage will go down, so his efficiency will go up. No, it doesn't always work that way. Players have to learn how to play a very different way. So I like him fine, but he's kind of in that weird in-between zone between where the Heat are picking in the first round and picking in the second round. If he's there at 43, great. Yeah. I would be surprised if he was.
What if Miami somehow packaged 15 and 43 and got two later first-round picks and somehow wound up with Kolek and Jaylen? Would that be addressing the needs?
That feels a little underwhelming. If you don't have any too high ceiling swings there, you're just taking two safe picks who kind of play the same position, who are both undersized for their positions. I don't know that I love that, but I mean, I guess it's a possibility. I don't know. Let's move on. Is there any truth to the Heat wanting to move up in the draft? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships. That's what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers or roof racks, exhaust kits or LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions do apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week, even during the offseason. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. Let's move into the mailbag portion of today's show. This question comes from JR5167 on YouTube, who writes in, any truth to the reports that the Heat are trying to move into the top 5? And if so, are there any rookies with real potential for immediate impact in that range? It's a good question. There was a report a few days ago that the Heat and the Lakers were two teams, playoff teams, looking to maybe move up into the top 5. Don't know if there's any truth to it. Can't speak to the validity of that report. I haven't done any digging on this specifically. But the idea of the Heat moving into the top 5, what do you think?
Seems a little unlikely. They're historically not a team that makes that kind of push. And when you look at this draft and the fact that there's no real superstar at the top of the draft, or at least not how they're projected to be, it could be a really solid draft and you could get a lot of quality role players, which is something that obviously a lot of NBA teams need, including Miami. And that's fine. I don't know that you're going to get a significantly better player at 5.
There's no
you are at 15.
There's no prize at the top, right? There's no Zion. There's no Wemby. There's no Anthony Davis. There's no prize.
No Dwayne Wade at number 5.
Right? There's no.
Yeah.
But in terms of guys who can maybe compete right away, play right away, the obvious name is Donovan Clingan, the 7'2" center out of UConn, being compared to Rudy Gobert, 2 championships. You know what he's going to be. The guy, he's going to walk in and he's going to improve your rim protection. He's just gonna. And I could see teams being intrigued by that. He's been mentioned as high as number 1 for Atlanta. If the Hawks just want to go play it safe and just say, hey, we just need to make sure we get something good with this number 1 pick. Maybe we just take Donovan Clingan and we don't take one of these more risky prospects. So I get it.
Right.
And so that would be the one guy. I also like Stephon Castle out of UConn too. He's sort of, I look at him, I'm like, that looks a lot like young Drew Holiday to me in the way that he plays, fights over screens. Not really a 1, not really a 2, kind of a tweener. I think that's fine, especially for Miami, a team that doesn't really value a traditional 1 anymore, right? How many times has Eric Spoelstra told us over the years, we don't really have a nominal point guard. Everybody has to handle the ball a little bit. And you look at what the Celtics have done in their championship run, very similar. I think the Heat are trying to build in that same way where everybody's got to do a little bit of ball handling. I could see Stephon Castle being a good, pick there and somebody that the Heat would be interested in. The other guy that I'm looking at, and he's not necessarily a top 5 guy, but if the Heat really wanted him, they might have to trade up to get him, is Devin Carter out of Providence. We know that the Heat have worked out Devin Carter. A top 5 pick might be a little bit of a reach, but if you think that that's the only spot that you could trade up into, right? Like if trading up to 7 or 8 or 9 isn't viable because Portland and San Antonio, Memphis don't want to trade down, then maybe the only thing you could do is to move up in the draft. There are reports that Detroit could be interested in moving out of the 5th pick for some more immediate help, right? Houston could be interested in moving out of number 3 for more immediate help. So even if you moved up and ended up reaching for the guy you wanted, if you don't think that guy's going to be there at 15, then you can only trade up to the teams that want to trade back or trade out, right? You can't just trade up anywhere you want. So I don't know. I look at that.
We should point out Detroit, who currently has the 5th pick in the draft, making some moves already,
just
terminating
coach. Yeah.
Monty Williams. So it looks like they're shaking things up, which is fine because they're kind of in a really nebulous state there where they had all this potential and everything else like that. So they might be looking to make a lot of moves. You brought up one to me yesterday. I don't know if it's one you want to submit onto this podcast.
It's
a little fiery, let's say.
I think, all right, I'll say it. I mean, there's no reporting behind this. I was just speculating. It's
sure
if the Heat are looking to relieve some of their cap issues and create some more financial flexibility, they're going to need to salary dump somebody. And you start looking at the rosters that are around that 20 million plus range. And okay, they're not going to trade Bam. They could trade Jimmy Butler, but that's an entirely different situation, contingent on the extension and all these things. But if you were just doing a straight salary dump, it makes sense to trade one of the 3 guards that you're paying $20+ million to, whether it's Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, or Tyler Herro. And I just wonder if the Heat would call up Detroit at number 5, offer 15 and one of those guards, presumably Tyler Herro in terms of value there, to move up to the 5th pick in the draft and then go get the guy that they're targeting, whether it's, Stephon Castle, Donovan Clingan, Devin Carter, Cody Williams, like whoever it might be that they're looking at, Ron Holland potentially. Like
Yeah.
Those are sort of the names that have been out there. It makes sense to me in terms of a viable strategy. If you're looking, again, you've got to be motivated to reduce your payroll. And then when you do that, you would actually, if you were to just trade Tyler Herro straight up for picks, you would actually unlock the non-taxpayer mid-level exception at like $12.9 million this summer. So you would essentially be getting a number 5 pick and a $12 million a year free agent for Tyler Herro. Now, I'm not saying that they need to do that. I'm not saying that that's definitely what they should do. I'm just saying it's an interesting option.
I know how a lot of our listeners are already going to take this. They're going to be submitting this, hitting that like button left and right in terms of that potential move, because I mean, with a frustration growing about Tyler and his game and his role and his salary and everything else like that, the idea of being able to get another role player and to be able to get a top 5 pick in the draft probably makes a lot of sense. I get it. It's just, again, who knows how that potential free agent, whoever that might be, how they'll shake up into the same level in Miami. And of course, with a draft pick, a top 5 pick, it's always a crapshoot. You never know if you're going to get a player as good as Tyler. Whether Tyler is overrated or not, it doesn't matter. Tyler is a fine player right now, and you know what you're getting with him. I don't know that Miami sees his ceiling already limited and says, you know what, we want to move on as quickly as possible and take a chance. Who knows what will happen? But at this point in time, we want to at least get something rather than what we're getting out of Tyler Herro. I don't think they're at that point yet. That's personally what I believe.
Robert writes in, and just give me a name for this. If the Heat were to trade up in the draft, who would you want them to target? So we don't trade up anywhere, but you got a name at the top of the draft that isn't going to be there at 15 that you like for Miami?
I think Castle's a good name, but I could see Devin Carter also. Those good potential options there. I'm a little surprised. It's just there isn't like a really generational type big that Miami could really swing for. I'm not a huge fan of Klingen's game, so I don't know that he's going to be that kind of game changer for Miami, but I guess he makes sense too. That's pretty much where I'm at. I even if the guards are where it's at in terms of like the higher talent and the higher ceiling, I think. So I think that's where Miami should focus if they do wind up trading up.
Castle, Carter, Cody Williams. I don't know if you said him. That makes a little bit more sense to him. He's getting some top 5-6 buzz right now.
That's surprising too. But his brother, obviously a very good player, so a lot of people see him and being in the same mold.
I'm a bigger fan of Klingen than you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his fit next to Bam would work, especially if you're trying to lean into your defense, which we'll talk about later in the week. Deron Holmes II. Just got to throw his name out there too. You might have to trade up for him.
You're going to take a top 5 pick?
I don't know if it's top 5, just trade up. You can trade up to like 10, 11, 12.
14?
14, wherever you need to get him. Those are
finally get a deal done with Portland. You get the 14th pick and you take Deron Holmes.
Couldn't get Dame, but we got Deron Holmes.
That's all you needed. That's all you needed. You'd be happy.
Should the Heat take Bronny James in the second round? We got a question about that coming up here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball and so much more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on anything, from who wins the I don't know what's a major award, the MVP award in Major League Baseball, to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com. So, visit. You know what you should do? You should bet on who's winning Rookie of the Year over at the WNBA, because I think that race is heating up a lot more than people think it might be. I know a lot of people assumed it was Caitlin Clark in a landslide, but Angel Reese is having a hell of a year. And don't underestimate Jimmy's friend in Los Angeles, Cameron Brink, too. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown. Did she?
I think so.
Damn it, then. Oh, wow. Way to go, Wes. Ruining everything.
Yeah, so knee injury. Yeah.
FanDuel.com/lockdown and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Let us know in the comments section who you think the Heat should be targeting in the draft later this month. Also follow us on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to some of these other mailbag questions that we had submitted, I have a question for you.
All right.
So Jonathan Goney put out his most recent mock draft up on ESPN this morning, and he's always got these interesting notes in these mock drafts. I recommend reading the entire thing, not just scrolling down to Miami's pick, seeing who he's got. And he had Zach Edey going there. Right. Again, I think he had him originally, changed it up. That's not interesting to me. The interesting part is this. This was in a different section. About Carlton Carrington, he had going number 20. And he goes, Carlton Carrington has been visiting teams primarily in the number 10 to 20 range, with franchises looking for point guards, such as Utah, Miami, and Orlando being especially interesting landing spots. The interesting part of this to me, David, is not necessarily the Carlton Carrington part of it. We did a Blue Notebook scouting report on him already. To me, it's the fact that Gavoni, from what it sounds like a reporting perspective, has identified Miami as a team looking for a point guard. Are you surprised by that?
Honestly, yes. Unless they're going to be making the kind of move that we just talked about in terms of trading one of the guards, the higher paid guards, either Rozier or Herro, out of the roster. You've also got DeLon Wright. You've also got Patty Mills as potential options there. You've also, you've got enough guards, I think, already in the mix. The idea that Miami is targeting a point guard specifically, and given exactly what you said before, the fact that Miami is looking for bigger players that can all handle the ball at some point or another, I don't see why point guard would be an area of need for the Heat. So to be honest with you, that does seem a little surprising. I get the idea of wanting somebody who can at least attack the rim, space the floor a little bit, provide that kind of ball handling and some good perimeter defense. But I think Miami, as much as they might need somebody like that, they also have that area fairly well covered too. I think you're looking at the loss of Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin. To me, you're probably looking more for wing depth, unless you're going to go out just completely out of the blue and add somebody like an Edey or somebody else that adds size to the roster.
Unless you project that you are going to be losing one of these guards this offseason. If you're the front office and you said, we're probably going to have to trade one of these guys, whether or not it's for salary cap relief or to address issues elsewhere on the roster, maybe that you look at the draft as a way to sort of backfill that with a younger, cheaper player. Patty Mills, DeLon Wright, you already hinted at this, but both of them are free agents. No guarantee that either of them come back, and not necessarily like awesome. Like these aren't the best backup point guards in the league either. So, I don't know that those are, and I know that they still have Josh Richardson presumably under contract. We assume that he's going to opt back into his $3 million contract. He dabbled a little bit in point guard duties last year, so you would have him on the roster as well. But Terry Rozier really is the only traditional point guard on the roster in terms of a guy who is just that experienced handling the ball all the time. Tyler Herro, I think, as much as he's come along there, is still limited in that regard. Duncan Robinson, I know the whole Duncan can dribble now thing was a great storyline. He's not a point guard, so I can see why they would want to address, and again, the free agent market in point guard is not great, but there are some interesting options. A Dennis Smith Jr. could be something like that if they were trying to address that. But if you're looking for a guy with a little bit of a higher ceiling, who's a little bit more of a traditional kind of set the table for everybody else, I could see it as a need. At 15, it seems a little high, but maybe at 43, we've talked about guys like Tristan Newton and some other guys. Maybe that's more of an option, but then again, finding a viable backup point guard in the second round is harder than it is in the first round. But a guy like Carlton Carrington, who has that big size and that ball handling background, not necessarily saying that they need to draft Carrington, but that does, again, make sense to me, and it addresses the position without actually like going with the Tyler Kolek sort of traditional mold of that. Another name here, and this question comes from Adam. Does Isaiah Collier only working out for the Heat mean that they're interested in him? Collier, the USC point guard, at one time thought could be the number one pick in this draft, but he seems to be sliding on draft boards. But it is interesting that the only tracked workout that Collier has, and we don't know that this is the only workout he has had. He's also, I'm assuming, has done a pro day at USC, so maybe most of these, and he was at the combine, so maybe teams saw what they needed already from him in those things. But the only tracked workout from Collier that we know of is with the Miami Heat. Does that mean anything to you?
It does. I think it's more reflective of Collier, though. Like, even now, as I'm thinking about it, Miami, again, typically not the kind of team that makes those sort of promises that, if you're available to us at 15, we're going to take you. Like right. Collier, I don't think he's in danger of being taken before 15. So I don't know that they would offer him any kind of promise that would have him cancel workouts. If anything, it might be more of an indicator that he just doesn't flourish in these type of workouts, that he has done what he could in the combine and other areas. And basically he's shown what he can. And you're either going to take a chance on his athletic talent and what he's already shown in his freshman year at USC, or you know what? He's just too high a risk, and at this point, he's just damaging his stock draft. So he might just be putting things at further risk by engaging in other workouts. And to your point, we don't know if they're actually going to take place or not. They might be under the radar, they just haven't been reported, etc. So there are a lot of possibilities out there. It just seems very unlikely, given Miami's draft history, that they're like, "Oh, we really like you. We're going to take you 15." They've never, to my knowledge, operated that way.
You hit it on the head, right? Very low, slim chance that Collier worked out with Miami and the Heat were just like, yeah, shut down the rest of your workouts. We're taking you at 15. Don't worry about it. Not how Miami operates even a little bit. I remember talking with Jaime Jaquez's dad for the Ringer story I wrote on him, and he was like, we didn't even know that they liked us. Like, we had no idea. We thought we had a good workout, but that was just us, right? Like, so we had no idea what was happening until it was happening. So, I think you're exactly right. I thought you got it bang on. This is more reflective of Collier. I would be surprised if Miami took him at 15 because he's got a ton of physical tools, a really high ceiling, but a really low floor. And for a playoff team with guys already in front of him in the depth chart, it's just really difficult for a player whose biggest concerns are commitment defensively, playmaking, and long-range shooting to carve out a role on a team like that, right? He needs
aren't those like the check marks that Spo loves the most? Right. Like you're not going to get any playing time unless you commit defensively, unless you make plays for others, and unless you've got your head in the game. And if Collier can't do any of those things, it's like, well, why do we even take?
Or even hit an open jumper, right? Like even if he's not your on-ball guy, like he can't walk in and just make a shot, and that's one of his biggest concerns. So I don't see it. Not in Miami. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Let's get to a couple more speed round really quick. Heat Expert writes in, is Dalton Knecht a bigger, stronger, more explosive, cost-controlled Tyler Herro, and does that make him worth trading up for? I'm going to say I don't love the Tyler Herro comp, but he might be a bigger, stronger, more explosive, cost-controlled Max Strus. But I don't know that he's worth trading up for. I would not trade up for him if I were Miami, but maybe they like him more than I do.
Fair enough.
Yep, okay. That's the speed round. David writes in, Bronny in the second round, 2 question marks. What do you think about Bronny?
I talked about it before. I think it's an interesting possibility. He seems like now, for whatever reason, has slipped completely to either late second round to out of the draft. And I think a lot of people, even talking about this the first time around, people were really surprised at my perspective that Miami should absolutely take a swing, that they're a franchise that could handle the noise. But there's the idea that he brings so much noise, and even beyond that, screw LeBron James. We don't have anything to do with him or his kid or anything like that here in Miami anymore. So I think a lot of Heat fans are probably still too vitriolic regarding the topic of LeBron James to even consider what he brings to the table. But as a second round pick, if you go big in the first round and then in the second round pick, you're looking to target somebody who might fill in as a backup point guard, a guy who brings high level defense, who has a high basketball IQ, and yes, has some connection to LeBron James, I don't see why that's not a good choice, but there are probably other names at 43 that might be a better fit for Miami.
Bronny James has only worked out for the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know that I've ever heard of a fringe second round prospect being
shutting it down,
limited with it. It's like, well, I'm only going to go to the Lakers or the Suns. It's like, all right, cool, dude. Like, we're not even sure you're an NBA player yet. That said, if the Heat, there has been some noise that Bronny could be taken before the Lakers are picking at 55 and whenever the Suns pick in the second round, if they have a second round pick. I don't know if they do. If you draft Bronny James, make sure you're doing it because you think he could be a legitimately good NBA player and not because you think that there's any shot at getting LeBron James. That is the wrong way. That is the wrong reason to take a player in this draft. Do not do that. I think the Heat learned from Shabazz Napier that is not a viable strategy. And if they take Bronny James at 43, I hope it would be because all the things that you said, you just think that guy is the best player on the board at 43. I have my doubts that he would be. So I'm less inclined to think that Bronny at 43 makes sense. Maybe at a different place later in the second round, but the Heat don't have that pick. Quickly, Diverge writes in, any chance Nikola Topic falls to 15 because of his injury? There was the knee injury with Topic. It's not considered serious. At least that's according to the latest reporting. Most mock drafts still have him going in the top 10, 11, 12. So being off the board by the time the Heat are 15. The reason I included this in our mailbag, though, David, is because the new CBA with a stipulation has a new stipulation that every draft prospect's injury history is automatically distributed to teams in the top 15 of the draft. So whatever has been reported about Topic, whatever the latest, that whatever the doctors are saying about Topic, the Heat don't even have to ask for that report. They're getting it automatically. So they'll know as well as anybody else in the top 15 how serious Topic's injury is. In terms of a fit, big body, good pick and roll ball handler, crafty finisher, not an incredible athlete, but not a bad one. Defensively, he sucks, or he did last year. Not a good outside shooter, but if he's there at 15, the Heat aren't worried about the medicals, and they think that he's got a really high ceiling, and we like having a bigger ball handler who can run some pick and roll, maybe it's an option. I have my doubts that that's the guy that Miami is targeting, though.
Yeah, so do I. Like, even if he were to drop to 15, I mean, I think if he drops to 15, that means there's a significant shakeup in that first part of the draft, and somebody else that they're probably higher on is going to drop as well. So I just don't see it likely. He just seems like more of a pick for a team like San Antonio that can develop him, take their time with him, and he can turn into something that they want to. They can max out his value, whatever that might be. And Miami, I just don't think they have the luxury of saying we're comfortable waiting a couple seasons for him to develop into the kind of player we want. And even if he reaches that peak, he doesn't sound like the kind of player Miami would want anywhere, a guy who can't play defense at a high level. So with all the things that he can do offensively, the weaknesses that he provides defensively don't seem like an attractive option for the Heat.
I kind of like Utah or Chicago for him at 10 and 11. That's sort of where I have
Chicago can afford to wait to have Topic develop into something?
I don't know what Chicago can wait.
Fair enough.
That's a great question. I don't know. Quickly, Christian writes in, are you trading Jimmy for Houston's number 3 pick or Detroit's number 5 pick and their unprotected pick next year? If he forces a trade, would be the only way that's happening. You would have to, presumably you could trade him into Detroit's cap space. I think they have enough space. Maybe not. You might have to send something back. Houston does not have the space. They'd have to send a bunch of contracts back, but we've talked about the Houston option. Any thoughts on that, or should we get to the last one?
I mean, I don't think that they can figure that out beforehand. I mean, that would assume that they're like, we don't even want to deal with it. We don't care about the extension at all.
You would automatically get hit with tampering, wouldn't you? If because the Heat can't negotiate the extension with Jimmy Butler until July 6th, and the draft is on June 26th. A week before, or 2 weeks before you're even allowed to negotiate the contract. So if you're the Heat and you're just saying, well, we're not even interested in having Jimmy Butler on the roster, this has nothing to do with the contract extension. Right. You would rather have the number 3 or the number 5 pick in a weak draft. That seems a little. It seems a little.
See, I wouldn't think it would have been as tampering, but yeah, you're right. I wouldn't think of it as tampering, but I do think it would be like, you know what? Did we just hit the final straw? We're so fed up with Jimmy Butler. We're done. We're out of the Jimmy Butler business, and we're going to trade him away.
But they would have to promise that they never talk, because we think that the only reason they're going to trade Jimmy Butler is because they can't get to an agreement on the extension. So they have to swear to Adam Silver. No, it has nothing. Or else they would get hit with tampering because they weren't supposed to be negotiating the extension when they weren't allowed to.
Unless he's sending dick pics to Pat Riley's wife, I don't see that happening. I don't think they're at that point. Yeah.
Not on draft night. All right. That'll wrap up our mailbag. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.